Hello and welcome to the Lost Boys podcast. I'm Tandy, joined by Harlan. Say hi, Harlan.
Hi, Harlan.
Today's episode, we're going to be going over the top 8 deck list from the most recent Invitational Qualifier for the TCGplayer Lorcana Invitational, hosted by Apex Gaming on October 20th weekend. I'm looking forward to doing coverage of that event, but Harlan's going to be playing in that event.
I am. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. We got to mark down our next competitor in the event this past weekend. And yeah, I'm still not 100% decided on what I should play, as I probably shouldn't be since we're still pretty far out. But I'm just so excited, and we're getting more and more deck lists to look at.
Yeah. So we did have a good-sized tournament this past weekend at the Apex Gaming home store in Caldwell, Ohio for our first ever Invitational Qualifier. We had 27 folks show up, and we have a top 8, which we'll be going over in just a little while. But before we do that, Harlan, we're going to have a new topic or whatever. It's going to be called Ask Harlan Anything. And so we're going to ask Harlan anything. Harlan, what'd you learn this week in testing?
So I don't know if it's what you would call learning or maybe just having it come up so that you thought about it. But I was playing with a steel deck and I was short on ink for a turn, and I already had a big tink in play, and I actually shifted another big tink onto my big tink just because I really needed the extra 1 damage to everything.
Okay.
And I was short resources to play it for 6.
Wow, I've never seen that come up before.
Yeah, but yeah, you can just shift onto the big version of the card with another one, which, yeah, it came up, and I can't say I plan to be doing that one very often, but it came up and it mattered, and I won because of it. So,
all right, my next question for Harlan is, what deck impressed you this week?
What deck impressed me? I think it was actually Emerald Amethyst.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I have never been all that enthused by the deck. You know, I'm not, as we talked about last week, I'm not usually the aggro player.
You're not a Cusco main? I
wish I was. I really like the card Cusco, and you know, I'm a big fan of Emperor's New Groove, but yeah, the Emerald decks just haven't really done it for me recently. But on coverage all weekend, the Emerald Amethyst decks looked really good to me all weekend.
All right. Favorite card in the new set?
Favorite card in the new set is definitely Cinderella, Stout-Hearted.
No, the big 7-drop from Steel.
Yeah, I have an affinity for the Steel decks, and
same.
They are going to be hard pressed with Big Cogsworth once he's out, and Cinderella's going to be really important for beating that one, I think.
All right, let me think of one more quick fire question to ask Harlan. All right, Harlan, what'd you eat for lunch today?
Ooh, what did I have? Oh, I was
the only stumper.
Yeah, I had leftover chicken tenders from the trivia place we go to every week, but I had leftover cane sauce in my fridge already.
That's next level maneuver, if I gotta say. Yeah, cane sauce is pretty good.
I came prepared.
Pretty good. All right, well, that's going to do it for Ask Harlan Anything. Learning about his testing for the week and stuff. We'll make sure to check back in with him every week and ask him a few more questions.
Yeah, why don't we have the viewers submit questions for this segment?
Oh yeah, quick fire questions. That'd be fun. Yeah, make sure to ask him in the comments, and I'll try to ask him next week for Harlan. All right, Ask Harlan Anything. It's everyone's talking about it. All right, moving on. We're gonna do a new thing for this segment as well. I wanted to take some time and talk about every single color, because I know a lot of the colors don't get as much love. Ruby Amethyst Control is just like all over the place. Everyone loves Amber because of how aggressive it is, but some of the colors don't really have as much of a magnifying glass on them. So we're going to be doing a new segment called Hot Tech Cards for each color. And Harlan, we're going to go one by one. You're going to tell me, give me a tech card for each color. Something that you're looking forward to trying out, or something you already think is pretty good. Let's start with Amber.
Amber? So I think right now the best tech card for Amber is You Have Forgotten Me.
The discard too? Yeah, that's a nice one.
Yeah, so it's a card that, a lot of us coming from Magic, kind of wrote off right away of, man, Mind Rot, the card from Magic, is just not very good, and that it costs 3. This costs 4. But, 4 versus 3 is a lot different in Lorcana. You're guaranteed to hit your lands. Your opponent is guaranteed to hit their ink every turn and build up, and that's going to end up being that their hand is going to be tight while they're holding something like Ursula and Elsa. And if you just catch them just at the right time, they go from behind to dead very quickly.
No, I mean, the way the game is constructed, right? Every single turn you play a resource and you play a card, so you actually get empty-handed very quickly. In every single game, there's always one perfect turn where you got 2 cards left in hand, and they're almost always the 2 best cards on your curve. It's like your, 5th resource and a payoff, and you either need a resource or another payoff for the next few turns to like really hammer home. But that's
exactly. And then it also mitigates a lot of its normal downside by just being inkable.
Right.
You can throw away the extra one once your opponent has no cards because the first one happened. You can just get rid of it. Or, your opponent, like, you need to be playing to the board and not dealing with their hand. You have to deal with their board. You just ink it to keep playing to the board. So it's been a really good card that impresses me. I think more people should play it in their Amber decks.
All right. Hot tech card for Steel. Go.
It's Beast Hard-Headed.
Beast Hard-Headed, that one destroys items, right?
Yes, yeah. Big old 4/4 chonker.
Bonk.
Eats their magic mirrors, eats their pocket watches, eats their Shield of Truths.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah, it's ink for when they don't have those cards in their deck. It just does it all.
All right, hot tech card for Ruby. Go.
Ruby, I think it's Pongo Ol Rascal.
Ooh, evasive. Why do you think evasive's good?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for the Ruby decks. There's like an Emerald Ruby deck that, is just evasive based. Pongo's like a solid role player in that. But I think it's actually more of a tech card in Ruby Amethyst. I think it's really important for Ruby Amethyst to be able to put pressure onto the board in the quote unquote mirror match. And Pongo having evasive so it doesn't get attacked by Gastone or Maui is really important. Or Rafiki. Yep, that's a huge deal too. You're actually seeing in a lot of Ruby Amethyst decks right now, like kind of a level 1, 2, 3 battle of Pongo, Goofy, and Tigger, where Tigger gets to eat all of them down the chain. Goofy is, the middle of the road. He's a 3/4, so he's going to live. He's going to eat their Pongo, but survive, and then, get the challenge and quest himself later. And then Pongo is, the lean, mean, down to earth 4-drop. And I think that's where I want to be. I've definitely come around to, in Lorcana in general, I want to be playing those, on a scale of 1 to 10, I want to be playing cards that are either a 1 or a 10, not the 7s, but especially when they're inkable.
Right.
That way when it is a 1, it just becomes ink. And then whenever it is good, I have the best possible version of the card versus a card that's middle of the road. And then I'm mostly going to ink it anyway because it's already middle of the road. So I should have a better version when I want that effect.
Right. That's good. All right. So Pongo for Ruby. What about Amethyst, the complementary color to the Ruby Amethyst control deck? What's your hot
Amethyst, tech? So the card I have been highest on for Amethyst in this kind of tech slot, I've been putting it in a lot more of my Amethyst decks, is actually the Wardrobe, Belle's Confidant.
Yeah, the 3/4 for 3. Nice.
Yeah, just talking about, having that 1 or a 10 and inkable. The Wardrobe is just stats. And that is what I have found my Amethyst decks needing is, everybody is prepared for your Rafikis and your Maleficents. And so either you're like hyper aggressively playing to the board or you're doing almost nothing to the board and just trying to sing Friends on the Other Side. And Wardrobe just comes down and is large. It's huge at that point in the game. And it's great because you just get to fire off your friends on the other side with it. You don't even have to worry about their Rafiki because Wardrobe's just going to eat it. It just dominates the board. all the Amethyst decks are trying to go late, so having something in that early to mid game that can just lock up the board for you is huge.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Stats when you're just constantly challenging and preparing to be challenged, having something that's just too large to be challenged by one character, I think is important. And Wardrobe does that. And I think with Friends on the Other Side, any 3-drop just has to be viable as long as it's inkable.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Now we're going to get into two of the colors that I don't think see enough love. Let's start with Emerald. What's your hot tech card for Emerald right now?
Yeah, so I would have to say, I don't really play that many Emerald decks, but the card that impresses me the most when it gets played in Emerald decks is Mother Gothel's Selfish Manipulator.
Oh, that one's scary to play against.
Yeah, so a lot of the times against Emerald, because basically they have the early drops like Flynn Rider and Hans that are like hyper aggressive. Okay, I have to get this off the board. Sometimes, I'm losing a card to the Flynn. I'm giving up game equity to stay alive early. And then they build into, their Tinkerbells and their Genies, which have evasive. So then it kind of pivots to, okay, I can't challenge their characters. My characters just have to quest and I have to race them as best as I can. And that's where Mother Gothel comes down. She quests once and then all of your stuff is off and you have to exchange all your stuff into that Mother Gothel to turn back into racing. And by then it's too late. Everyone's running away with it.
No, I mean, basically she says you can't quest until she's gone, right? So like, she basically just says your stuff's attacking this turn, and it's all attacking Mother Gothel, and then we'll see what happens after that. And she's got a pretty high willpower, so she can withstand usually 2 hits, sometimes 3, and keep trucking. But it's a very nice little tech card for the Emerald decks. Last but not least, maybe the least played color in competitive Lorcana so far. What's your hot tech card? And maybe what gets Sapphire off the ground?
Yeah, so this one's tough. I also don't even really love the card I chose for this. The card I chose is Belle Dreaming Guardian. Or sorry, it's Aurora Dreaming Guardian. I don't know why I have Belle written down. But yeah, so it's the Shift Aurora that gives your other things
Ward?
Ward. Yeah, Ward is the name of the mechanic. So it's really important, especially against like Ruby Amethyst, to protect your other stuff, because this is kind of what's holding Sapphire back. But the Sapphire game plan is kind of, accelerate your Inkwell and then just play characters out. And when they just get to pick off your best one, you get left with scraps a lot of the time. And that's where Aurora comes in, where Aurora is just a solid body, 5 cost, 3 strength, 5 willpower, quest for 2, but it protects your more impactful characters from, the Dragon's Fire and things like that. Definitely not the strongest thing to be doing in Sapphire. I really hope somebody figures that out. That'd be sweet. Especially, nobody is going to really be super prepared for a sweet Sapphire deck, especially for the Invitational, I don't think.
No, I think that Aurora giving Ward to maybe something of a different color could be really nice, right? Like there's plenty of things that you want to protect that are in different colors. I think Sapphire being the primary ramp color actually is kind of weak on the top end. And so you can pair it with Ruby to get, Maleficent Monstrous Dragon and the Aladdin package with the Heroic Outlaw on the top end. Or you can go a different direction, have like, a lot of card draw with Friends on the Other Side or big wheel effects from a Whole New World out of Steel. And whichever way you go, really, is completely up to you. And really, you're just trying to leverage, that ramp effect that you get in Sapphire. And the ward protection is like another thing that you can offer to a different color because your minions are just relatively weak in Sapphire. Basically, to make it so you can't be a one-trick pony, have ramp into big payoff.
Yep, exactly.
All right. Cool. Hot tech cards for each color. Dunzo Washington. So we're going to be moving on now. We're going to be talking about the metagame and each of the top 8 deck lists from the most recent invitational qualifier that we held at Apex Gaming. The invitational is sponsored by TCGplayer and will be on October 20th weekend. We'll be streaming it on twitch.tv/Apex Gaming. We'll also be streaming it on YouTube. Not sure exactly what the address is. We'll get to at some point in the near future. But these A decks that we have from this invitational qualifier, we had 27 players and we boiled it down to a winner, Nicholas Roush on Amber Steel. We'll get to his deck list last, but congrats to him for qualifying for the invitational. And you're going to be playing against him come October 20th weekend.
Yeah. Hopefully for me, he just doesn't switch decks and I have some known quantity, but we'll see what he ends up bringing to the invitational.
All right, so the first deck that I do want to bring up, we're going to go 8th to 1st. Let's start off with Zarek Wiley's Ruby Amethyst deck. Let's talk about some of the things we like and dislike. He had 2 copies of Mickey Mouse Brave Little Tailor. I think that this is one of the more controversial adds to the Ruby Amethyst control archetype. It's a late game finisher card, but it doesn't really do anything when it comes into play. Most of your other characters that you play, the spells that you play, have an immediate impact on the game, whereas Brave Little Tailor needs to have a full, ready cycle to be able to quest for 4 or to start challenging things. Ruby not really known for waiting around, has Maui, has Maleficent, has Aladdin Heroic Outlaws shift onto Baby Aladdin to really turn the game in these really impactful immediate ways. And I just feel like Brave Little Tailor is just not really fitting into that game plan.
Yeah, so Brave Little Tailor kind of suffers from just being an 8-cost card. Like, that is just a huge cost to not be impacting the board immediately.
Right.
It does impact the board in a big way in that it's a giant evasive threat.
Yeah.
But not doing it immediately very much holds it back for me. I find when I do play with the card, I find myself inking it very often. Where, earlier I was talking about Pongo Old Rascal, and that's where I want my evasive cards to be, is in that, it's a 1 or a 10, which I guess Mickey kind of fits into that role, but just Pongo in these Ruby decks, you can, when you have 8, a lot of times you could maybe wait a turn until you have 9, and then you could play Pongo and a Dragonfire, and then it's kind of like you built a Maleficent, and it's not quite the same thing, but being able to play 2 cards while you're trying to be aggressive to the board and shift the game, being able to play something else with it is huge for me. And you really don't need to be questing for 4. You don't need to turn on an absolute dime like that. You just need to be able to gradually shift, and especially with an evasive threat, you're going to be able to snowball with that threat anyway, is the plan. So it really doesn't need to be questing for 4.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I didn't really like the Mickey Brave Little Tailors. I was also not a big fan of the Ursula's Cauldron. I know that's one that a lot of people love, including one of your fellow competitors, Kyle Huck, owner of Apex Gaming, along with his brother Taryn Huck. He plays a lot with Amethyst, and he loves Ursula's Cauldron.
Yeah, I would say extremely low on the card. I think I would play a copy after my 3rd Magic Mirror if I was going to play a 3rd Magic Mirror.
Okay.
I think that there are way too many good cards in Amethyst that are uninkable for Ursula's Cauldron to see play for me. I know there are a lot of people that play, 2, 3 copies even. And you're just going to run into way too many issues of finding ink to go into your inkwell when you have cards like that in your deck. And, there's a little bit of an argument of, well, the Cauldron finds you your ink and then fixes your draws for the mid to late game after that. But I'd rather just have all the ink in my deck, and then, I can just make those decisions in my hand. I don't need to be, taking turn 2 off and falling further behind potentially in these games where I'm already the deck on the back foot naturally and playing for a longer game.
No, I completely agree. I think that Cauldron is a bit of a trap. Like, it feels good when you're playing it, but the cost of actually playing it means not playing anything on 2, not using it as ink, and often as ink, it would help you the turn following or even the turn after that to smooth your draw out. And it has no direct impact on the board. So drawing one late game, pretty weak. Drawing a second one ever, horrible, if you ask me. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's a funny card, just that from the Cauldron player's perspective, they get to see all the info and they're like, man, this card's great. My opponent has no idea how great it is.
Yeah.
And then from the opponent's side, they're like, wow, you just took your turn off to play that, and then you waste my time looking at the top 2 cards every turn.
Yeah, are you done yet?
You're just losing the whole
my
game.
Turn? My go?
That card doesn't do anything. And yeah, it's somewhere in the middle, but
it's somewhere in the middle. It's
closer to bad than good.
I think it's really close to good. I think that there's a reason why people really enjoy playing it. It's because it feels like you're doing something powerful. There's very few cards in the game that manipulate the top of the deck like Ursula's Cauldron does. And while it doesn't replace itself, hey, I really need this to be prepared on 7. Well, you're probably going to find it, like that feeling is like a parachute almost. And it's something that like you can kind of plan towards when you have in your opening hand. You're like, oh, I have this on 2. I'll very likely be able to play a be prepared on 7 if that's my goal. And I think that that's one of the reasons why people like the card. But I'll say again, I don't think it's that great. And I think a second copy is really bad. And our next person playing in the event was 7th place Levi Love, who is playing 2 copies of Ursula's Cauldron. You can't. You just can't do it. Drawing 2 copies is horrible.
Yeah, I'm really low on it. Like I said, it doesn't do it for me. I do get that people really like it.
Yeah.
The thing that really doesn't do it for me is it is not terribly relevant in the like quote unquote mirror where you would think that type of effect would be at its best.
Yeah.
Because you're going to see like the games just go on forever. So you get to filter as many cards as possible.
I don't want to get super deep into the nuance of the Ruby Amethyst control mirror. Most of the games end up decking, which is its own horrible problem that I really don't know how to fix or have the time or energy to fix. What I will say, though, is the 7th place Levi Love's deck is playing 3 copies of LeFou Instigator, the one that can ready one of your characters. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting inclusion. I think it is probably very strong in the mirror matches where, you're Elsaing each other.
Mm-hmm.
An unexpected untap or a ready is very strong. It's also good against bodyguards when you're trying to get your Rafiki in early. Mm-hmm. It's definitely an interesting card. I haven't played it much in my bigger builds of Ruby Amethyst, but it is again one of those inkable 1s or a 10. I think it's going to be a 1 a lot of the time, but when it's a 10, this card's almost an 11 sometimes.
Now, another strange inclusion in this deck. We have 3 copies of Magic Broom Bucket Brigade, but no copies of the Mickey Mouse that lets them come back to your hand. Choosing instead to just have the 3 Magic Brooms to try to survive for the last few turns. As you whittle away the last remnants of your hand.
Yeah, interesting. Choosing. Identifying that the games definitely come down to decking, so they're trying to kind of just loop their brooms, I guess, is their idea.
Yeah, and put back some of their better cards as the games go really long, right?
Yeah, just get some extra threats in there.
Yep.
That's interesting.
6th place, also playing Ruby Amethyst. We're going to be talking about Franklin Folks' build. Franklin Folks actually plays a lot on the Magic series that Apex Gaming runs, and is highly decorated on that series, so I would watch out for this version of the deck and his decks in general. This build is playing 4 copies of Magic Broom and 4 copies of Mickey Mouse Wayward Sorcerer, trying to win the mirror by just having Broom Supremacy, perhaps.
Yeah, so I assume that's their plan. It is interesting to me how low of a count everybody has had on White Rabbit's Pocket Watch.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, so the Broom package really shines based on how many pocket watches you're playing.
Sure.
And, you know, especially only having one, it's some amount of the time you're going to have to ink it on a pivotal turn, and then you lose access to it completely. So I would definitely at least have two. Most of my builds, I play three, just so I can burn them.
I mean, yeah, that way you can burn one early and still have one late to guarantee. That makes sense.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, Franklin Folks' list also playing 4 copies of Gaston, Arrogant Hunter. The 2-drop allows you to challenge all sorts of larger characters on the opponent's side, including Simba Bodyguard, as well as all the way up to Cusco, which helps out against those Emerald decks. And we actually had a couple Emerald decks in this top 8. Not used to seeing Emerald too much around. One last person, though, top 8'd with Ruby Amethyst. And we're going to jump a little bit just to kind of group these together. But in second place, we had Matthew Campo's version of Ruby Amethyst. Is there anything in Matthew Campo's list that stands out to you? Like, oh, maybe this is why Matthew was able to get second as opposed to the other players who were 8-7-6, like bottom of the line.
Definitely the 4 copies of Ursula Power Hungry.
Yeah, that good, huh?
Yeah. So, well, I don't know if I would necessarily say that. I've been pretty low on it in specifically Ruby Amethyst. I've found a lot more success just loading up on my inkable threats. Sure. Just because between Dragonfire and Be Prepared, you end up really glutted on uninkables in Ruby Amethyst. But I definitely think that played a part in his success, especially if he was playing a lot of mirrors.
Well, I do want to note that there are no copies of the Mickey Mouse Wayward Sorceress in this to go along with the brooms, and so perhaps a slightly less, ready for the mirror match than one of the other players, but was able to interact with, the Emerald Amethyst aggro decks that we're going to be talking about in just a second.
Yeah, so I do think Ursula is huge for the aggressive decks, being able to, just tick down their clock just a little bit. And like what I was talking about before, where, especially against like the Emerald builds, you just have to commit to racing at a certain point. Ursula is incredible at that.
Right.
Ursula just sets their lore back down and then just quests for 3 and is nearly unkillable with 8 willpower. It's so hard to get an Ursula off the table.
All right. The next deck we're going to be moving on to is 5th place, Devin Harrison. And Devin is playing Emerald Amethyst aggro. This is a very lore-heavy generator deck where many of the characters do quest for 3, and it tries to essentially race those really low-to-the-ground aggro decks while also having things that can be very problematic for the control decks.
Yeah, absolutely. I see. Let's see what's in here.
So one card that I think has been popping up in a good bit of these decks that I'm actually not 100% sold on. I'm curious your thoughts about Hans Scheming Prince. This 4-cost 3/3 from Emerald is inkable. It quests for 3, no special abilities, but a 4-cost character that can quest for 3 is quite hefty.
Yeah, so I think Hans is an incredible card on rate. Having 3 lore on a 4-drop is huge. I think they definitely balance the card properly with it being a 3/3. So, it's going to trade in combat usually at that point in the game, but it's also going to be pretty easy to get off the table. I do think that more people should be inking this card in a lot of games than they are currently.
Sure.
But it is a powerhouse of a threat early in the game for sure.
So this, Amethyst Emerald deck, it has 2 different 3-cost songs in it that I think are both quite good. Mother Knows Best. This one's not inkable. This is 3-cost. Return a character to their player's hand. And then also, the classic Friends on the Other Side from Amethyst that's been all over the place. This is maybe the perfect spot to talk about adding the wardrobe to your deck. We talked about how wardrobe was one of your tech cards for the week. Being able to sing either of those songs in a deck like this while having reasonable stats for challenging and defending against your opponent's stuff, I think could maybe be a nice addition.
Yeah, I think that would be a great include here. One of the things I've always noticed about this archetype in general is that the 3-drops aren't actually very good at singing. Maleficent obviously is a fine singer in that you already got the card back from it. So whenever they eat it, it's not a big deal whenever they can eat it with a Rafiki or something like that.
Mm.
But Cheshire Cat is not a very good singer.
No, it's not.
Yeah, like that card has one job, which is produce 2 lore and cross your fingers that you get to do it again.
Yeah, and then even when your opponent finally deals with it, it does trade, which is nice.
Yeah, another card that could do. They do have 4 Jasper here, actually. Jasper is really good for singing these songs and surviving to tell the tale again.
Yeah.
And Jasper also is another card that kind of does that Mother Gothel impression, just for one character. And I've had mixed feelings on Jasper. I do think that the 3rd strength from a wardrobe might actually be better than his ability some amount of the time. Mm-hmm. So I'd maybe entertain the idea of a split or maybe even trimming a Cheshire Cat.
Another neat little combo in the deck that I want to point out is the 1-cost Olaf Friendly Snowman. This 1/3 is inkable in a quest for 1. But that combined with Megara pulling the strings, the 2-cost Emerald aggressive character that's a 2/1 inkable quest for 1 says, Wonder Boy, when you play this chosen character gets +2 strength this turn. So you're kind of combining this 1-drop with Megara pulling the strings to allow it to challenge it something with 3 willpower, specifically Simba Bodyguard, which has been tearing up the scene in the Amber aggro decks.
I love this combination being put in these decks. It's just such a nice, easy to do thing where, Megara is not a card that you would normally play because, it has a low willpower and it has a low lore count. Mm. So it's not necessarily that great in these aggro decks, but it adds just such a high upside when you already want to be playing a card like Olaf to have counterplay when you play an aggro mirror match and just eat their character almost for free while developing your board. It's incredible when you pop off that combo, especially when you eat like a Simba, and then you have a 2/1 and a 1/3 with 2 damage on it still in play, and you're ready to go on curve.
Yeah, the other player in the top 8 playing the Emerald Amethyst aggro deck is Randall Webbing. You can check out his list. Very similar lists. The numbers are a little bit different, but actually, Randall Webbing's list has your Emerald Tech card of the week, Mother Gothel, Selfish Manipulator. Maybe that was the difference between top 8 and top 4.
Yeah, definitely a strong potential, especially in the mirrors. Mother Gothel is huge in those questing focus games.
Yeah, because you're just racing.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I see that Randall did was Randall only has 1 Olaf and has 3 Duke of Wesselton.
Right.
So it definitely has leaned more into the Goons plan versus the 1/3s. And I think I can't speak for Randall, but in my mind, that tells me that Randall was actually expecting a good amount of steal. So like I've talked about previously, that the 1/3s are, when there's like a goon metagame, the 1/3s are better because they get to quest twice into a goon.
Right.
If your opponent is playing steal and is going to have a captain hook,
yeah,
that's where the dynamic shifts right back. Yeah, exactly. And maybe Randall was, thinking that might be the case for this event.
Yeah, I think that the Emerald Amethyst deck definitely can be built in a couple of different ways. I mean, these are pretty huge emphasis on Cusco and Mad Hatter to do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of lore generation, but a lot of the early 2-drops can generate a bunch of lore as well. Flynn Rider, punishes your opponent for attacking it by making them discard, but it quests for 2. And so, you just have these sort of weaker on the board stats, Hans, things like that. But when your opponent takes their time to challenge them, you're the one questing. You're the one pushing towards ending the game and hitting that lore threshold of 20, while your opponent is just like scrapping to find answers to some things like Cusco, which don't even really have a real answer because it has ward. So moving on, we're going to be checking out not only the winners list, but 4th place list. Both of these players were playing Amber Steel aggro. Let's start with the 4th place's John Mann's list. So this is a Amber Steel aggro deck built around Ariel Spectacular Singer. It has a bunch of kind of like mid-rangey cards in it. Very not quite the like Stitch Blitz deck that I've been playing a ton of. Goes a bit bigger with Stitch Carefree Surfer, Beast Hard-Headed, and one of your tech cards of the week, You Have Forgotten Me.
Yeah, so this is actually what I would consider the actual Amber Steel mid-range deck.
Right.
And it can definitely be a little confusing to identify the two, just because obviously they're the same two colors and we have one set in the game, so they're going to share a ton of cards.
Like 40 cards, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So the clear identifiers to me are typically the Hakuna Matatas and the Stitch Carefree Surfers.
Right.
So what those tell me is that they're because they don't play a whole new world, they're trying to have their aerials find anything that can be inked so that they can just keep, effectively get a draw card off of the aerial just to find their ink for the following turn. And then this deck is just playing to the board and just trying to make raw stats. And you see that from the Cerberus three-headed dog here too. This deck just wants to put characters into play, exchange resources with your opponent as many times as you can, and then Stitch Carefree Surfer and Rapunzel and just bury your opponent in cards.
Yeah, Rapunzel is the magic wand, right? Like Rapunzel is a $50 card for a reason. It's probably the top 5 cards of the game, if not the best card in the game. And the way that it changes how your opponent plays against you, let alone like how people have to plan against you, even in deck building, to make sure that they don't just run headfirst into a deck playing, 4 copies of Rapunzel. She makes things like Grab Your Sword look kind of embarrassing, posing Tinkerbell giant fairies. Oftentimes, if they can't finish off a character, Rapunzel comes down and draws 3 cards, and suddenly you're losing. And
the game is over at that point, usually.
Yeah, a lot of times it is. 3 cards is a heck of a lot, especially when things double as a resource or, something that can impact the actual game. So I love anything Amber Steel. This deck is a bit more mid-rangey than what I like, but everything in it makes a lot of sense. Things with high willpower like Cerberus three-headed dog and Moana of Mutani working with Rapunzel because they have high willpower is pretty nice.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually a deck I play a lot on Pixelborn Ladder. I love the deck. It's so much fun to play. As soon as you play your first Stitch Carefree Surfer, you just start going off. You always find a second one, and then inevitably they trade their whole board for your 4/8, and then you get to Hades it back to your hand, and then you're already primed to draw 2 more cards off of that one. It's so much fun. And also, this deck is still very good against aggro decks because you have all the steel cards. You have Captain Hook and Prince Eric to be characters that are great when you're on the draw. You have Smash, you have Grab Your Sword, you have Tinkerbell. So, this deck has all of this card advantage and a strong anti-aggro plan.
Yeah, plus, not to mention, Rapunzel actually works really well when you're being defensive in your challenger cards as well, but especially ones that have high willpower like Prince Eric that has 3 willpower. You're playing against those aggro decks. They have a heavy incentive to quest early, even at the cost of losing their characters in an uneven exchange. And those uneven exchanges leave windows for Rapunzel to come down and really hammer home the advantage you're already gaining on top of trading positively with your opponent's stuff.
Yeah, something I've noticed happening as I get higher in ladder is, I start playing against better and better players. And once they notice that you are Steel and Amber and you have a Prince Eric, they'll stop questing with their cheap characters.
Right.
So that to turn off your Rapunzel draw, whether you have the Rapunzel or not, because they don't know. And that actually, so they start holding their characters back so that you don't get to, just blow them out with the Rapunzel play. And then that just walks them right into your Grab Your Swords, where they haven't gained that lore off all those characters, and those characters just all go to the bin.
Rotting on the vine.
Massive. Yeah, exactly. You just squeeze them from both sides.
All right, lastly, we're going to talk about Nicholas Roush's Amber Steel. I'm calling this one Stitch Blitz. This is an aggro deck built around Stitch New Dog and the big shift version, Stitch Rockstar. That combined with a bunch of 1 and 2 cost characters allows you to flood the table with those cheap characters and have refreshes every time you play one. Combined with a tight little package of Aerial Spectacular Singer and A Whole New World, you have a really powerful payoff for playing an early creature rush strategy that a lot of decks are not prepared to beat. And Nicholas Rausch used that masterfully to take down the whole tournament, first place, and an invite to the Invitational on October 20th.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the decks that you can come in with a plan. You can have your deck built to play against this. And you know what Mike Tyson used to say? You can have the best plan until somebody punches you in the mouth. This deck is fast, it is strong, and it has one of the most powerful cards in the game in it, which is A Whole New World.
Right.
It's a card that... Go ahead.
Whole New World, people, when it was first previewed, were trying to build it around ramp strategies in Sapphire, basically using Fishbone Quill, empty your hand as fast as possible, refresh, draw 7. In theory, that makes a lot of sense because you're playing against other players who are trying to do the same thing, playing ramp effects or just like playing big card draw things like Friends on the Other Side. And so in initial testing, when you're not playing against a bunch of aggressive decks, you're thinking, oh, this is a powerful, very good strategy. But the moment your opponent plays a 1-drop and a 2-drop into a 3-drop, or God forbid, 1-drop, 2-drop, 3 1-drops, or just like 3 or 4 characters in the first 3 or 4 turns, suddenly a 5-cost draw 7 for both players does not seem very appealing. And the way that we have decided to use this card, positively speaking, is we're trying to empty our hand instead of with ink. We're trying to empty our hand instead with characters that cost 1 and 2. These things that can quest and that can be used with Stitch Rockstar later on. And we're abusing it with Aerial Spectacular Singer, not necessarily finding it off the Aerial's dig ability, but just by singing it on the 4th turn after you're able to empty your hand because you've constructed your deck in such a way where you're able to do exactly that.
Yeah, exactly. So the way to take advantage of this card is you have to be, generating extra resources to then take advantage of both players discarding their hands and drawing 7. And it's a lot easier to just play a bunch of cheap characters than it is to get extra ink.
Exactly. One needs
really
fish. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. One is, jumping through a lot of hoops to do a thing, and the other one's just playing the game.
Right. I mean, look, characters quest at 20 and ink doesn't, so...
Yeah, that's true too. What's the old statement? Aggro doesn't have a fail rate.
Yeah, that's a good one. So this deck is a classic aggressive deck from Amber that we've seen a lot of over the past few weeks. Lilo making a wish, that powerful 1-cost character, the quest for 2. We're protecting it with bodyguards like Simba Protective Cub. It doesn't look like we have any other bodyguards in the deck, but personally, I'm a big fan of the new Prince that has Resist 2, I believe, and a quest for 2. I'm looking forward to trying that out in a deck like this as an extra bodyguard.
Yeah, that card looked great in our games last week. There was actually even a point where I was like, well, I can't get through this bodyguard, but at least bodyguards only quest for 1. And then as I was thinking to say that, I was like, that one quests for 2. This is messed up.
Yeah, it's pretty good too. So the thing that really sticks out to me in this build is Rapunzel Gifted with Healing. This is not an ideal Rapunzel Gifted with Healing deck because that usually warrants playing things with a lot of high willpower, and this deck does not have a lot of characters with a high willpower. Instead, an emphasis on those cheaper characters in order to enable Stitch Rockstar. But Rapunzel's so strong, especially if you just play some things that you can target. Specifically in this instance, we're playing, things with 3 toughness like Prince Eric, Simba Protective Cub, Aerial Spectacular Singer. But we also have the Tinkerbell package of the Tiny Tactician and the Giant Fairy, and those get into combat quite often and aggressively and are prime candidates for Rapunzel's Gifted with Healing.
Yeah, and this all goes back to what I was talking about earlier, 1s and 10s. As long as it's inkable, it can be a 1 or a 10. You can just ink it. It'll be fine.
I've been a big Hades fan. Hades is in that slot for me right now, but the more I watch Rapunzel just dunk on people, the more I want to play it. So
yeah, I mean, it's especially for something like the Invitational. There's a lot of a lot of equity to be gained just from having 2 Rapunzels in your deck, just because then your opponent has to play around them. If you have 0, I can do whatever I want with my characters and I never have to think about it.
right.
But if you have 2 Rapunzels, then it's like, oh my god, I can't quest with my Maleficent because they could just put 2 damage on their thing and draw 2 cards, and then I'm hugely behind all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, that's just always the threat of Rapunzel. Even if it's not in your hand, you have to play in such a way so that it doesn't bury you. So it just kind of warps the game in a really positive way for those who have access to it. So big shout out to Nicholas Rausch, and congrats again for qualifying for the TCGplayer Lorcana Invitational hosted by Apex Gaming. We're going to be having that October 20th weekend at the home store of Apex Gaming, Caldwell, Ohio, and we're going to be streaming it on twitch.tv/Apex Gaming. That brings us to our next segment, Card of the Week. All right, Harlan, what's your card of the week?
Well, I've talked about it probably more than any other card on the show this week, but it's the wardrobe.
Oh yeah,
confidant.
Yeah. What do you like so much about the wardrobe?
So I have just so many games lately. Everybody is playing all the come into play effects and great questers, and that is all well and good. Those cards are all great, but you know what keeps happening is I just noticed that, I want something a little bit bigger or something with a little more staying power. And I also, I've found that I have a pretty good anti-aggro package lined up, but I need to just supplement it just a little bit. And that's where this 3-cost 3/4 it just does it all. It sings my friends on the other side perfectly. God forbid I've been playing, an Amethyst Amber deck a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what a 3/4 is primed to do? Get
What?
Rapunzeled for 3 cards.
That's pretty nice.
Ooh. Yeah, that one felt real good when I've done that. It just something that comes up all the time is that all these characters have these stats, and that essentially boils down to cards in the way of damage later in the game. Like you get to the late game where you're playing a big Elsa and it's a 4/6, but it's still going to trade with 2 smaller characters and, some miscellaneous random amount of damage from something else, right? And that essentially boils down to a 2-for-1. But I spent 8 resources and you spent like 5. It all comes together into tempo. And that's where like just great large stats on rate is huge. You don't want to do only that. You do have to have a mix of all of it, though, I found.
Yeah, I think having some characters do the heavy lifting in terms of their speciality is the thing that breaks the game open, but you need characters that just have good rates so that you can elongate the game enough to get to the point where those later game characters actually have a viable impact and you have enough time to get them off. And cards like the wardrobe perfectly facilitate that on a number of metrics. All right,
exactly.
My card of the week is something I used to kick your butt last week, and that's 0 to Hero, baby.
Oh, why'd you have to remind me?
Because that card's sweet.
That card is sweet.
0 to Hero is a 2-cost Amber song. It's not inkable. That's a huge strike against it. But it says the next character that you play this turn costs 1 ink less for each character you have in play. So it's kind of like a ritual effect based on the number of characters that you have in play, but it can be used like a song. And there are some really strong Amber 2-cost cards that can sing it, namely Simba the Bodyguard. And I think that combined with being the most aggressively slanted color already makes it an X factor that the deck just did not have before. And I talked a little bit about this card on Twitter last week with Brendan DeCandio and a couple other people. I was really excited about it. And they're like, just replace it with any 4 Amber or Steel cards. And I think that your deck's going to be a lot better. And I said, get some imagination, buddy. This is a card that needs a home, and it needs someone to really stretch it and to really take it for a spin. And that's what I did, and it looks great. You know, we did a turn 3. I think we got to shift a Stitch Rockstar onto a baby Stitch. That's ridiculous. That's overkill.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. I think this is going to be my new life motto for Lorcana, of just the 1 in 10 thing. But unfortunately, this card isn't inkable, so it actually has to be the 1 in your hand some amount of the time.
Yeah.
And I think it might be worth it. The card is so good.
Look, as long as you're 10, it's going to
be a 10 a lot.
It is, and as long as you're playing a build of the deck that's constantly churning and has cards in hand, stuff to do with it, you know, I think that it requires playing cards like Rapunzel, oh no, but like Hades, A Whole New World, you know, these Stitch Rockstar, just all these cards that kind of coalesce around each other, but just always leave your hand full. And when your hand's always full, that just means Zero to Hero is always going to be doing something. And when you're playing huge bursts of resources like A Whole New World and Stitch Rockstar, oftentimes the glut, the thing that keeps you from going anymore, is you run out of ink. And this is just a song that can kind of function like 4 to 6 ink with regularity and without actually much trouble in the curve.
Yeah, while I was listening to you, it clicked for me. This might be the thing that makes Amber Amethyst work.
What are you trying to do with it with Amethyst? I'm curious now.
Well, so just you talking about, you know, having the card flow to go with it. Amber Amethyst is, I would say, probably the best deck at drawing cards, because it has both the colors that are really good at drawing cards, outside of, you know, Steel with A Whole New World. But you just have a consistent flow versus A Whole New World, which is like big bursts of cards. And the thing that holds Amber Amethyst back is that you don't have any way to deal with characters outside of challenges. So once you fall behind, it's really, really hard to catch up. But if your deck has some nitrous in it, and you can just turbo out
to the moon.
Exactly. That's a way to not fall behind.
Listen, if all I do is I go 1-drop into Simba into 3-drop, sing 0 to Hero, play another 3-drop, that's good enough to me. That's just like it's Burning Tree Emissary. It's free resources in a deck that the only time you run out of stuff to do is when you run out of ink. And
now think about that the 2 3-drops are just Maleficent. They both drew a card.
Right. Exactly.
We're going off, baby.
Yeah, and sometimes it's even worse than that. Sometimes it's like 2 Rafikis, and then you chew up your opponent's side of the table, right? So, like, I just think 0 to Hero is potentially just a really strong card in any deck that's constantly flush with resources. And it looks bad on paper because it's not inkable, and it requires you to play a flood of characters in order to get full value. But I am well versed in that field already, thanks to my love for Stitch Rockstar and A Whole New World, and combining those two into Stitch Blitz. And I'm really just looking forward to seeing if we can find some cool homes for my card of the week, 0 to Hero. That's basically all I got for this week, Harlan. You know, it was a fun weekend where we were doing commentary at the Apex store in Ohio. Actually had my boy Mason Clark, one of your fellow competitors, doing commentary with me in the booth. Do you know him very well?
Yeah, Mason's actually a very good friend of mine, very close with Mason. I'm actually working with Mason for this event, staying with him for the event. I was really sad to, have prior commitments, so I couldn't do commentary, but it was fun to be able to watch, and hopefully I'll be able to do some commentary in the future.
All right. Well, we do have another one of those invitational qualifiers coming up on October 14th. That's a week from Saturday, so make sure to check out ApexGaming.gg for more information on that event. We'll be crowning a champion, which will qualify for the TCG Player $5,000 Lorcana Invitational on October 20th weekend. On that Friday, October 20th, we're also going to be having 2 last chance qualifiers, and the winner of those will be joining the Invitational with us on Saturday. And that's going to be a 2-day event with huge weird brackets that we'll explain when the broadcast begins. And these players are basically going to be fighting it out for $5,000 in cash. So make sure to check out apexgaming.gg for more information on how to sign up for the event. Follow the Lost Boys on Twitter. That's Lost Boys LOR. Follow us on YouTube if you're following this on a different podcast service, Lost Boys LOR. Big shout out to our sponsor, Games and Comics Paradise out of Fairfax, Virginia. They're your one-stop shop for all things TCG related, from Pokemon to Yu-Gi-Oh! All the way to Magic Gathering and Disney's Lorcana. Make sure to check out gcparadise.com for all of your TCG needs. That's gcparadise.com. Harlan, that's the end of the show. You got anything for me?
Yeah, actually, our sponsor, GC Paradise in Fairfax, Virginia, actually has a Lorcana event coming up this month, October 29th. It's a Sunday in Fairfax. I'm going to be there. So if you want to battle me, come on out.
Heck yeah, that sounds like a fun time. I'll be in Apex, Ohio, doing commentary over a Magic event. But if you're in the Fairfax, Virginia area, make sure to head on to gcparadise.com for more information on their event on the October 28th weekend. That's going to do it for me. Thanks for watching and listening to the Lost Boys podcast. I'm Tandy, joined by Harlan Fear. We'll see you next time.